So good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, we'll continue from the last time where we had stopped. We discussed approach to systolic murmurs, diastolic murmurs. So what we are going to discuss this time is the continuous murmurs and the dynamic auscultation. I think continuous murmur is something which we don't encounter very frequently in our day-to-day practice. However, we may be seeing only few continuous murmurs like PDA. PDA is the most continuous murmurs, apart from the other non-cardiac causes like the venous hum, memory shuffle. The PDA is the most common continuous murmur which we encounter. And then there are a few rare causes like rupture of sinus of Valsalva and incoarctation of aorta. So let's discuss something about the continuous murmurs. Yeah. So what is a continuous murmur is? It's a murmur which begins in the systole and continue without interruption through the timing of S2 into all the part of the all or the part of the diastole without the change in the character. So basically it starts with the systole and takes either throughout the diastole or it starts just before the next S1. It encasses the S2. So it encloses the second heart sound in itself. And in both the systole and diastole, there is the character remains the same. So that is one thing about the continuous murmur. However, there is something which is like a continuous murmur is a to and fro murmur. Basically, a to and fro murmur is in systole there is a different character, and in diastole there is a different character. In continuous murmur, you get the flow in the same direction through the orifice. However, in a to and fro murmur, you get in two different directions, as in VSD and AR, or ASAR, or MSMR. So these are the things which are typical example of to and fro murmur. In this, there will be a gap in the systole and the diastole. It does not envelop the second heart sound. The character of the murmur is different in both the systole and the diastole. So that is what the basic difference between a continuous and a to and fro murmur. Now, there are various causes of continuous murmurs. So this can be actually divided into either a rapid blood flow or a localized arterial obstruction, or there are two true continuous murmurs. So the true continuous murmur can either be from the systemic artery to pulmonary artery, like from the aorta to pulmonary artery, or it can be from the coronary artery to a cardiac chamber. So the typical examples of systemic artery to pulmonary artery, that is the aorta into a pulmonary artery, are patent ductus arteriosus, aortopulmonary window, which mimics a PDA, and then we have truncus arteriosus with ostial of the pulmonary artery stenosis. So truncus arteriosus with ostial of the pulmonary artery stenosis, and after a shunt surgery like a VT shunt. So these are the typical examples of aortic runoff into the pulmonary artery. Then we can have systemic artery to pulmonary artery like L kappa. L kappa is an anomalous origin of left coronary artery from the pulmonary artery. So you will have collaterals from the right coronary artery, which fills the pulmonary artery and the left coronary artery via the collateral. And because of this, we get a continuous murmur. Then we can have bronchial in patients with TOF and pulmonary atresia because of the collaterals. So these collaterals are from the systemic artery to the pulmonary artery, like either a bronchial collaterals or other collaterals. Then we have other causes of continuous murmurs like the Lutembecker syndrome. So basically a mitral stenosis with a ASD. So it is because of the restrictive ASD, that is a small sized or a restrictive ASD, you get a continuous murmur across the atrial septal defect. Then similarly, mitral atresia with restrictive atrial septal defect can have continuous murmur. In a patients with AV fistula, either a coronary AV fistula, like from the RCA to the right atrium, they can have continuous murmur, or total anomalous pulmonary venous connection drainage, they can have continuous murmur. Then you can have in the rupture of sinus of Valsalva either to the RA or into the RV, or you can have coronary cameral fistula. So these are the various cardiac causes which can have continuous murmur. Then we can have localized arterial obstruction. Basically, these are something like a bruit, which produces a continuous murmur, like in a coarctation of aorta. In coarctation of aorta, there are some causes of continuous murmur, like they have well-formed collaterals. So we get something known as Sussman sign, which is a collateral murmur, which is a continuous murmur, or the coarctation of aorta itself. Like if you have a significant narrowing in a coarctation, so you can get the blood flow in both the systole and the diastole, then you can get a continuous murmur. Then we can have in branch pulmonary artery stenosis. In celiac artery occlusion, you can get a bruit, which may be heard as a continuous murmur. femoral artery occlusion, renal artery occlusion, or a common mesenteric artery occlusion. So these are the various things which localize arterial obstruction, which ideally it produces a bruit, but it mimics a continuous murmur. Then we can have in various other high flow states like a cervical venous. We know in various causes like anemia, thyrotoxicosis, we get venous, cervical venous, which are best heard during the diastole and the neck turn to the left side, so that there is a interruption or there is a kinking of the neck vessels. Then in pregnancy, we get a mammary shuffle, which can be heard as a continuous murmur. In patients with hyperthyroidism, we can get a continuous murmur. In patients with hemangioma or in patients with renal cell carcinoma, or in patients with cirrhosis and all, where you get a Purvilliers sign, that is a continuous murmur around the portovenous collaterals. So these are the various causes of continuous murmurs. Now, again, let's discuss in a little in detail. So that it can be between a connection between a high pressure vessel and a low pressure vessel. Like as an example, from the aorta to the pulmonary artery, from the high pressure of the aorta to the pulmonary artery, as in patent ductus arteriosus, autopulmonary window, and from the rupture of sinus of Valsalva into the right atrium or the right ventricle. Then we can have connection between from the coronary artery, as in coronary AV fistula, which drains into the RA or RV or a pulmonary artery, and in a patient with L-kappa, like the right coronary artery via the collaterals filling the left coronary artery, or the other atrioventricular communication like the bronchopulmonary collaterals in patients with pulmonary atresia and tetralogy of Fallot. Then we can have in patients with pulmonary AV fistula or systemic AV fistula. Then other examples are the Lutembecker syndrome with restrictive ASD. The ASD should be restrictive in all these cases. Now let's discuss something about the patent ductus arteriosus, which is the most common continuous murmur which we hear. We know the patent ductus arteriosus, we get a continuous murmur. It is usually almost like a grade 5. So the continuous murmurs are not graded. We usually tell it grade 5 because you can hear it without the stent on the chest wall. So it's that high frequency. So it is also known as the Gibson's murmur or the machinery murmur. We know it is because it sounds like a machinery, or it is called a Gibson's or a Gibson's because it was first told by the Gibson. The best heard, it is in the best heard in the left first intercostal space. So the PDA murmur is best heard in the left first intercostal space, and also best heard in the left infraclavicular fossa. So these are both the places where they can be best heard, at the left first intercostal space or the left infraclavicular fossa. Now there are a lot of eddy current. The one of the characteristic thing about the PDA continuous murmur is there are a lot of eddy currents which are heard as clicks. So throughout the systole, you will hear a lot of clicks, which are actually the eddy currents. Also, one of the typical thing about the PDA continuous murmur is it is the only continuous murmur which usually peaks at the second heart sound. So some continuous murmurs are peaks in the diastole, some during the systole, but this is the only continuous murmur which peaks at the second heart sound or just after the second heart sound. And if you suppose there is a patient in which the PDA is non-restrictive, then you get a high frequency soft murmur which peaks around S2. However, if the PDA is moderately restrictive, then you get a loud coarse machinery murmur, which I already discussed, are eddy sounds. Lot of clicks are heard. So there are conditions where a PDA may not produce a continuous murmur. Example, in neonates, when the pulmonary venous resistance is very high, PVR is very high, you may just get a short systolic murmur. Or if the ductus is very small, you may not able to get a continuous murmur. Now, in a patients with pulmonary artery hypertension or a Eisenmenger syndrome, the diastolic component goes off and then the systolic component goes off. So in a patient with very large ductus with a PDA, with a Eisenmenger and all, you may be able to get only the systolic murmur and not the diastolic murmur. Again, in a patient who has a aortic stenosis or associated coarctation of aorta, in patients with PDA, due to low aortic pressure, you may not be able to hear a continuous murmur. So these are the various causes of not having a continuous murmur in a patient with PDA. But out of this, the most common scenario is the patient with pulmonary artery hypertension, where the diastolic component goes off. So which are the other continuous murmur? I told about the autopulmonary window. It very closely mimics a PDA murmur. One of the important differences as compared to the PDA, it is usually heard lower down. The continuous murmur is heard lower down in the third and fourth, or the second and third intercostal space. However, AP window is one of the conditions which is usually associated with very early development of Eisenmenger syndrome. So the PAH occurs very early in patient with autopulmonary window. The third, which classical cause of a continuous murmur, is rupture of sinus of Valsalva. Now, we know the sinus of Valsalva is an structure which can rupture either to the RA or into the RV. So it will produce a murmur basically in the right lower sternal border if it ruptures to the RA, or to the left lower sternal border if it ruptures to the RV. Also, if it ruptures to the RVOT or the pulmonary artery, you may get a murmur on the third left intercostal space. Now, there are few differences between this and the PDA is that it doesn't peak at the second heart sound. It is one of the continuous murmur which peaks in the diastole. Now, why? Because the rupture of sinus of Valsalva during the systole, the sinus of Valsalva gets compressed, and that is why it may not be heard better during the systole. Also, one of the cause is the Venturi effect, because of which during the systole the murmur intensity decreases, and during the diastole, when it perfuses, it is heard more louder in intensity, and it is not peaks around S2 like a PDA murmur. Rupture of sinus of Valsalva is one of the important differential. You should always think in a young person who has a history of sudden onset breathlessness, like a person at 25 or 30s who gives a history of sometime a sudden when while weighing a lifting a weight, and then he tells of sudden onset chest pain, and then over a period of time the patient develops dyspnea. So this is a typical presentation of a rupture of sinus of Valsalva, and this is how a continuous murmur in that reacts. Now we can also have a continuous murmur in patient with Lutembacher syndrome. Lutembacher syndrome is mitral stenosis plus atrial septal defect. So in a patient with the mitral stenosis, if you have a restrictive atrial septal defect, you can get a continuous murmur around the atrial septal defect. It is around the lower left sternal border, that is the body of right atrium. Now, there are one more typical example of continuous murmur is the coronary AV fistula, as I already discussed. If the coronary from the right, most commonly it is from the right coronary artery. If it goes to the right atrium, it can go to the left atrium, coronary sinus. But the typical is this is also one of the continuous murmur which increases during the diastole, because the coronary perfuses during the diastole. So, like a ruptured sinus of Valsalva, it is one of the continuous murmur which is heard more during the diastole than the systole. So, so it depends on where does it the fistula from the coronary artery is. You can get the various location of the coronary AV fistula murmur. Now, one of the important cause of continuous murmur is again the L-kappa, as I already told you, anomalous origin of the left coronary artery from the pulmonary artery. Usually it is seen in young infants and young children, which usually presents with left ventricular dysfunction and mitral regurgitation. And this murmur is again louder in the diastole, because the LV contraction, it decreases the flow. So it does not peak around S2, and usually it is heard in the left upper sternal border or the right upper sternal border, because our right coronary artery via the collaterals fills the left coronary artery. So next are the causes like the rapid blood flow, like the AV fistula. It is more commonly heard during in the venous side. It can be most commonly is the pulmonary AV fistula, and the murmur is best heard usually extrathoracic. And it can be because of the rapid blood flow like a cervical venous hum or a memory shuffle, or in patients with hyperthyroidism, hemangioma, or various malignancies like HCC or a renal cell carcinoma. Then it can be because of the stenosed arteries with inadequate distal collaterals. So these are not the very common causes, like in a patients with peripheral pulmonary artery stenosis, or in the patients with coarctation of aorta, you get the collateral murmurs over the back, which is known as the Sussman sign. Or in patients with atherosclerotic carotid, which is usually the carotid bruit which we hear. Or aortic arch vessel, like I already told, renal artery bruit or femoral artery bruit. So basically, these are the bruit which are usually heard as continuous murmurs. Now, one of the important things which they may ask you in your exam is a venous hum. Now, venous hum mimics a continuous murmur. It is usually seen in both in healthy children and young healthy adults, but it can also be organic in patients with anemia, thyrotoxicosis. Because of the turbulence, it is because of the increased turbulence to the blood flow, best heard in the patient in sitting position and with the bell of the stethoscope. It is usually heard into the medial aspect of the right supraclavicular fossa, and you should turn the patient head to the left side, because that causes the increased kinking of the innominate vein of the right side, and it usually disappears when the patient is returned to the normal position, that is in the lying down position. It is best heard during the diastole as compared to the systole, and it is usually high pitched sound. Also, it radiates to the infraclavicular areas, so people may confuse it with the other continuous murmurs. You should always check by obliteration. You should obliterate the neck vein and then again check it. So these are the various typical findings about the venous hum. Now, this was about the continuous murmur. There is also one way to divide the continuous murmur, like continuous murmur with cyanosis and without cyanosis. So this is how in exam, if you get a case of continuous murmur, you should see whether the patient has cyanosis. But most common cause of continuous murmurs are without cyanosis, like a patent ductus arteriosus, or in patients with coarctation of aorta or rupture of sinus of Valsalva or coronary artery, coronary AV fistula. But there are few 3 to 4 typical examples of patients with cyanotic heart disease and continuous murmur, which include the patients with TOF and pulmonary atresia with collaterals. Then in a patient post BT shunt, after a BT shunt, then you can have in patients with continuous murmur with pulmonary AV fistula. In patients with pulmonary AV fistula, they are usually cyanotic, they have clubbing and all, and they have, so these are typical examples. And in the patient with TAPVC and all, total anomalous pulmonary venous connection. So you should always divide the continuous murmurs into with cyanosis and without cyanosis. So this was in short about the continuous murmur, because you should know a little bit also about the continuous murmur. So the next topic which we'll discuss is about the dynamic auscultation. This remains one of the important topic, because as we discuss the systolic diastolic murmurs, there are always various maneuvers, let it be physiological like the or the positional maneuver or the drug maneuver or the something like a Valsalva and squatting, which alters the cardiac hemodynamics and which may increase or decrease the intensity of the murmur or the duration of the murmur. So what is a dynamic auscultation it is a technique of altering the circulatory hemodynamics by a variety of physiological maneuvers, or some it can be positional, and it determines the effect of this maneuvers on the heart sounds and the murmur. So this maneuvers may either increase the blood flow or decrease the blood flow, causing increased intensity and duration of your various murmurs and the heart sounds. So this is what a dynamic auscultation is, and we do a lot of bedside interventions. I think the what take home message I want you to take from this class is, in all the murmurs which you hear in your day-to-day practice, always do some sort of dynamic maneuvers or auscultation to see what happens to those murmurs with each of them. So this intervention can be respiratory, that is either inspiration or expiration. It can be positional, that is uh, standing from a lying down position, or on lying down position, or patient sitting and leaning forward, or left lateral decubitus position, or prone position, or various physical maneuvers like a squatting, Valsalva. So this or Muller's maneuver. So these are various maneuvers, and then pharmacological are the amyl nitrate or phenylephrine or methoxamine. So let's discuss in detail each of this intervention, because I want all of you, once you auscultate any murmur, try doing some maneuver to this, so that you should know what happens to this murmurs on this maneuver. So let's start with respiration. So most common thing what we see is inspiratory effect of on the murmurs. Last time I had already discussed that inspiration is one thing which increases the split of A2 and P2. So it increases the split of A2 P2. Why? Because the pulmonary hangout interval increases, and that is why split increases. Whereas on inspiration, On expiration, the split becomes narrow and it closes. Why? Because during the expiration, A2 P2 closes. Also, what happens is on expiration, there is a on inspiration, because the intrathoracic pressure is low, all the blood is pulled into the pulmonary circulation, and that is why what happens, there is decreased flow to the left side, and that is why also the aortic component close it out aortic outer component closes late. So these are the few things about the inspiration. So now what happens is on inspiration, the intrathoracic pressure decreases. However, there is increased venous return to the right side of the heart, and there is a dilatation of the pulmonary vascular system causing increased hangout interval. So this is the mechanism of why the split of A2 and P2 it increases. However, there is an increased stroke volume to the right side, and almost all the murmurs of the right side increases. Last time I told you there is only one exception to this is pulmonary ejection click. Valvular click of the pulmonary circulation, it decreases in intensity on inspiration. Now, why does that happen is on inspiration, the venous return increases, that increases the RV end diastolic pressure. So there is a premature opening of the pulmonary valve. So when it opens, it doesn't open from a longer distance, but it opens from a shorter distance. And that is why there is a decrease in intensity of the pulmonary valvular ejection click and not the vascular. It only applies to pulmonary valvular ejection click. And so this is one of the exception to this rule. Now, on expiration, as I already told you, what happens is there is a decreased lung volume and pulmonary venous return. So on inspiration, because the intrathoracic pressure decreases to the left side, the blood flow decreases. However, on expiration, because of the decreased lung volumes, all the blood from the pulmonary vascular bed comes to the pulmonary venous flow, and it increases to the left atrium. So all the murmurs of the left heart usually increases on expiration, except mitral regurgitation, which doesn't seem to get affected much by this rule. So on expiration, all the murmurs of the left heart increases, except mitral regurgitation, which either changes very little or it doesn't get changed at all. So this rule you should always remember. Now, all the murmurs which are accentuated during the inspiration are, we know the tricuspid regurgitation, last time we discussed, it is known as the Carvalho sign. However, there are few conditions where there is no inspiratory rise of tricuspid regurgitation murmur, like we already discussed in a patient with RV dysfunction or right ventricular failure, it doesn't affect much. So TR is the Carvalho sign is the inspiratory increase in TR murmur. Also, that in tricuspid stenosis, if the TR is associated with tricuspid stenosis, you do not get much of the Carvalho sign. However, the TS murmur may again increase on inspiration. Also, if there is a patient with normotensive pulmonary regurgitation, this is also one thing which I discussed last time. In a patient with hypertensive PR, because the pulmonary vascular resistance is already high, it doesn't affect much by inspiration. However, if a patient has normotensive PR, like an infectoendocarditis or carcinoid syndrome, so that is the murmur which may increase on inspiration. Again, a patient who has mild to moderate pulmonary stenosis may increase on inspiration, but if a patient has severe pulmonary stenosis, there cannot be further rise in gradient. So a patient with severe PS, the murmur usually is not increased on inspiration. Again, the left-sided murmurs are increased during expirations are mitral stenosis, aortic stenosis, aortic regurgitation. We already discussed the mitral regurgitation murmur is not much affected by expiration. The VSD murmur, because there is an increased flow to the left side, the LV to the RV blood flow increases, and so the VSD murmur may get increased by expiration. We know that there is a pericardial friction rub which may be increased during expiration because the AP diameter is affected during or increased during the expiration. So these are the few of the murmurs which are affected by inspiration and expiration. Now, as I already discussed, in a patient with RV failure and pulmonary artery hypertension, so in the patients with tricuspid regurgitation with RV dysfunction, there cannot be further inspiratory augmentation of right-sided pressure, and so it is not much affected. Now, let's come to the next important thing is postural. So posture is one of the things. You should always auscultate almost all the patients of a right-sided murmur and the left-sided murmur by making them standing. So it is not only important for those murmur. There are few exceptions to this rules like mitral valve prolapse and hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which is against these rules, and you may be able to yeah, further or increase the intensity or decrease the intensity of those murmur. So you should always remember that immediately after the change of posture, within the next 10 to 15 beats, you have to see the effect of the murmur, because it is only a transient phenomena and it won't be affected for long. So within the first 10 to 15 beats, you should be able to hear this postural changes. Now, what happens on standing is, if you do a rapid standing or rapid sitting, or ideally it is to do a standing maneuver from the lying down, then what happens is there is a decreased venous return due to venous pulling in the legs and also in the splanchnic vessel. It decreases the stroke volume, it decreases the mean arterial pressure, it decreases the heart size. However, there is something called reflex tachycardia, which happens and the systemic resistance increases. So standing ideally decrease the venous return to both the chambers because of the decreased heart size, and the mean arterial pressure decreases. Now what happens is, ideally all the murmurs, both of the right side and the left side, it should decrease. However, there are two murmurs which are exception to this rule are HOCM and mitral valve prolapse. Again, I'll tell the same thing which I discussed last time. In patients with HCM, anything which decreases the LV cavity size causes an increase in the dynamic LVOTO. So anything which decreases the LV cavity size, it causes the dynamic left ventricular outflow tract obstruction, and so the intensity of the murmur increases. So that on standing, the LV cavity size decreases, and so the murmur, ejection murmur of HCM becomes louder and longer. Similarly, in case patients with mitral valve prolapse, because the LV cavity size decreases, the prolapse happens earlier. So that is why the click occurs earlier. And because the click is earlier, there is a longer late systolic murmur. It is a long duration. However, the intensity, it's very variable. The intensity is not much affected as compared to the duration. So the click occurs earlier, and that is why the murmur becomes longer. However, the intensity is not affected much. So these are the two murmurs which are against the rule of standing, that is the decreased murmurs of the left and right side. Now, again, there is another positional maneuver which is known as squatting. So squatting is something which is must in a patient with left ventricular outflow tract obstruction, like a patient in his 50s or 60s. If you're thinking that there is a aortic stenosis murmur or a HCM murmur, or you are confused, you should always do standing maneuver, you should always do Valsalva, and you should always do squatting, because these are the maneuvers which will distinguish between this murmur. So what happens is, when you do a squatting, what is the most important thing is, there is a kinking of the iliac artery, and because of the kinking of iliac artery, the systemic vascular resistance increases. Also, the squatting causes the increased venous return and the stroke volume. So both the right and left sided murmurs, because of the two different mechanism, increases. So but there is a transient bradycardia because of the increased systemic arterial pressure, which doesn't make much effect to the murmurs. But the important mechanism is the increased venous return and stroke volume, which affects the right murmur, and increased systemic vascular resistance, which increases the left-sided murmur. So what happens is, because of the increased venous return and cardiac output, it augments most of the murmur, like atrial aortic stenosis, pulmonary stenosis, the mitral regurgitation, aortic regurgitation increases, and that is why the VSD murmur, which is because the LV pressure increases, there is more ascent from the left to right. However, there is one important difference is, it it makes a changes to the right heart murmurs earlier than the left heart murmur. So the right heart murmurs are affected in 3 to 4 cardiac cycle, as compared to the left murmurs, which are affected after 5 to 6 cardiac cycles. However, again, there are few rules. We know the squatting increases the SVR, the LV cavity size increases, and so the murmur of HCM, it decreases in intensity and duration. So that is one important thing. So when you from you do a standing, squatting, standing maneuver, the murmur of HCM, what happens is because of squatting, there is increased SVR, and that is why the LV cavity size increases, and that is why the dynamic LVOTO decreases, which decreases the intensity and duration of a HCM murmur. And similarly, the mitral valve prolapse, the prolapse occurs later and the click occurs later. And that is why the murmur is shorter in duration. So that is what the squatting makes a difference to the HCM and mitral valve prolapse. Now we know that there are some murmurs which are better heard in left lateral position. The typical example is a mitral stenosis because it causes the closeness of the heart to the chest wall. So all the murmurs where it is the flow from the LA to the LV or the vice versa, like the mitral regurgitation murmur or a Austin Flint murmur where there is a flow from the LV to the LA, it causes an increased intensity because in the left lateral position, the LV becomes close to the chest wall. And so the MS murmur, MR murmur, and Austin Flint murmur of aortic regurgitation are usually increased in the left lateral position. Now we know there are murmurs which are better heard in sitting and leaning forward. So these murmurs are usually aortic stenosis murmur and aortic regurgitation. It is the aortic regurgitation murmur which is better heard on sitting and leaning forward, and also the pulmonary regurgitation murmur because the pulmonary artery comes closer to the chest wall. They are readily audible and better audible on the patient sitting and leaning forward. In prone position, we do not do this position quite often as a dynamic auscultation. However, it brings the heart close to the chest wall, making the pericardial rub more prominent. So a pericardial rub becomes more prominent on prone position and knee chest position. Now, I would like to interrupt for 1 or 2 minutes. If any doubt is there, you can ask because the next maneuver is an important maneuver which will take around 5 to 10 minutes. Any doubts, Sanket?
Sir,
Yeah.
is to and fro murmur is same as a systolic or diastolic murmur, what they say?
Yeah, it can be systolic or diastolic murmur. Yeah.
They're same, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay. And I think there is one question which we can address at the end, sir. It is not in this direct context, but ASD, VSD, and PDA. Some common tips on clinical case they want. I think once this gets over,
Pardon?
sir, just
Can you tell?
PDA, VSD, and ASD.
Yeah.
Yeah, some clinical tips on their clinical presentation, like natural history, at what age they present, how they manifest.
Okay, okay. Anyway,
so
when you got you got the question, we'll discuss it here only. So
okay.
I think this is the one case which you may get in exam is the ASD, VSD, and PDA. So the more common clinical things which you should get is any patient who has a history of congenital heart disease. Like somebody tells you there is a history of hole in the heart or something like that, you should always see the time of presentation. We always know that the pre-tricuspid shunt, atrial septal defect, it usually presents little later, that is the 4th decade or the 5th decade. Whereas a post-tricuspid shunt like VSD and PDA, they present earlier in the 2nd decade or 3rd decade. Now, why does it happen is in the ASD, the blood flows to the LA to the RA to the RV, and RA is the main chamber. So because the RA is a very compliant chamber, as compared to the left side, RV is a very compliant chamber, and so the RV will dilate long, it will take the volume overload, and only once the RV starts failing, not only systolic dysfunction but maybe because of the diastolic dysfunction of the RV, then only the patient becomes symptomatic. That is why ASD, because the RV is the main chamber, it takes a lot of time because RV is a very compliant chamber. It takes a lot of time for the RV to fail. So any condition in the late 40s or 50s like systemic hypertension, RV dysfunction, associated aortic stenosis or atrial arrhythmias, most common is because of the atrial fibrillation, atrial flutter. They usually present in 4th to 5th decade. Whereas a VSD and PDA, we know that the blood in VSD is directly from the LV to the RV. So RV is only a conduit. RV is not the main chamber. RV is only a conduit in a patient with VSD. So RV just carries the blood from the LV and into the LA and the LV. So once the LA and LV becomes volume overload, the patient starts getting the symptom. So the VSD and PDA usually present early in presentation, and ASD is delayed presentation. Now ASD, you should know that if any patient with a wide and fixed split, clinically, if the patient has only ASD, the typical finding you'll get is a wide and fixed split. So wide and fixed split, I already discussed last time. Why do you get a wide split and why do you get a fixed split? Because the blood coming to the RV is constant both during inspiration and expiration. And why it is wide split is because of the hangout interval. So a wide and fixed split is a typical of ASD. Now that is how a typical ASD present. However, if a patient with ASD has significant shunt, when do we tell a shunt is significant? Is when the shunt is more than 2:1. Then you will start getting findings of a large ASD, like a flow murmur from across the tricuspid valve. So a mid-diastolic murmur across the tricuspid valve is one of the typical findings of a large ASD. Then you may get findings of pulmonary artery hypertension. You may get a RV type of apex, and very rarely in a large ASD you'll get a thrill. So a thrill in the pulmonary area, though not very typical of a large ASD, you may get a thrill in a pulmonary area. JVP is not very common. You may get a equal to V wave in most of the ASD. However, when the ASD becomes very large and the shunt is large, you'll start getting prominent V waves even without tricuspid regurgitation. So a large V wave will tell a significant shunt in a patient with ASD. Now, as compared to ASD, patients with VSD will have wide and variable split, but it again depends on whether the VSD is small, inter or moderate size, or a large VSD. In a patients in both with small VSD and large VSD, we usually don't get pansystolic murmur, because in small VSD, as I discussed, the VSD is usually closed by the membranous aneurysm or a muscular septum. Whereas in a patient with a large VSD with a pulmonary artery hypertension, because the gradient between the RV and the LV are less, you get only a early systolic or a short systolic murmur. It is basically a moderately restrictive VSD which produces a thrill, which produces a pansystolic murmur. So the typical finding of a VSD is thrill and a pansystolic murmur. However, when to tell a VSD has large shunt, that is more than 2:1, is you start getting left ventricular S3, you start getting flow of mid diastolic murmur across the LV, and you get a cardiomegaly. So if you have a VSD with a cardiomegaly, LVS3 and flow MDM, then you know that a VSD is large. Similarly, ideally a PDA should produce a continuous murmur, as we discussed. However, again, like a VSD, if you get a PDA which doesn't have a continuous murmur but only a systolic murmur, it means the patient has started getting pulmonary artery hypertension. So systolic murmur, LVS3 and flow murmur across the LV and a cardiomegaly tells that PDA has started becoming large or a pulmonary artery hypertension. So these are the typical findings of ASD, VSD and PDA, right?
Yes, I think it was quite detailed. So I think if no further question, we can move on. If any question is there, you can message me. I can convey it.
Sir, to and fro and that continuous murmur, can you tell me one thing?
Yeah. See, a continuous murmur is there is it starts in the systole, it continues through the second heart sound. So you won't get a separate second heart sound, and it continues into the diastole and it stops just before, or it continues full of the diastole. Most of the time it stops before the next S1. It is the same character of murmur both during the inspiration, both during the systole and the diastole. And yeah. However, in a to and fro murmur, like a VSD and AR, in a continuous murmur, it's like example, it's a PDA. It's through the ductus only. It's the same direction of the flow. However, in a to and fro murmur, VSD and AR, the VSD's murmur is from the LV to the RV. The AR murmur is in different direction. So it's the two different murmurs. The characters, the pitch, and the frequency is different because they are two different murmurs. It doesn't envelop the second heart sound. You may still be able to get a separate second heart sound because both of this murmur doesn't go into the second heart sound. It stops before the second heart sound and starts after the next in the diastole. So that is the basically important difference between a to and fro and a continuous murmur.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. So the next important maneuver is the Valsalva maneuver. Now, most of the time we do not do this maneuver because it is one of the very tedious maneuver to do in exam, and if you it becomes takes a lot of time to tell a patient how to do this maneuver. Second, even a patient may not do this maneuver correctly. However, there are a few modifications of doing this maneuver. So the normally how we do a Valsalva is it is a deep it is what is actually a Valsalva is a forced expiration against a closed glottis. So most of us know this. It is a relatively deep inspiration followed by a forced exhalation against a closed glottis, and for around 10 to 20 seconds. It's not a short time, but it's around 10 to 20 seconds. Now, there are few modifications like a Valsalva can be done by using with the help of a manometer, in which the patient blows into a mercury manometer and maintains a gradient pressure of about 40 millimeter of mercury for about 15 seconds. So 40 millimeter of mercury for about 15 seconds. But again, this is one of a tedious thing and not actually practiced. However, the most common way of demonstrating a Valsalva is you have to tell the patient to take a breath and put the flat of your hand on the patient tummy, and then a patient pushes back the examiner's hand, which is pressed downward in the mid abdomen. So you have to tell the patient to take a light breath and press the flat of your hand on the patient tummy on the mid abdomen, and tell the patient to push back the examiner's hand. So this is the most common way or most easy way to do a Valsalva maneuver. I always remember you should not do in patients with ischemic heart disease, because this Valsalva maneuver, because it decreases the blood flow to the LV, it can decrease the coronary blood flow and may induce ischemia. And we all know that the Valsalva has 4 phases. It is the phase 1 and 3 which are not perceptible at bedside, and that is why most of the maneuvers or Valsalva makes what we hear the murmurs are, it's the phase 2 which makes a difference. So now what happens during various phases of Valsalva? So the phase 1, we know in the phase 1 there is an increase in intrathoracic pressure. Because of the increase in intrathoracic pressure, all the pulmonary venous return comes to the left heart, and there is a transient increase in LV cardiac output, and that is why the systemic arterial pressure increases, and there is always a reflex bradycardia. Whenever the BP increases, there will be a reflex bradycardia because of the baroreceptors. Now, so what happens in phase 1 is, because of the increase in intrathoracic pressure, the blood flow, because of intrathoracic, the decreased pulling of the blood to the pulmonary bed and increased pulmonary venous return. And that is why the LV output increases, and that is why systemic blood pressure increases, but heart rate decreases. Now, the second phase is the most important phase, that is the strain phase, and that is what we are clinically interested in. The strain phase, there is decrease in the venous return. It is first decreases to the right side of the heart, and then there is a decrease in venous return to the left side of the heart. So what happens is there is a decrease in systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, pulse pressure, all the pressure decreases, and the baroreceptors are activated, which cause a reflex tachycardia. So we know that all the murmurs of both the right side and both the left side should ideally decrease on Valsalva. Again, the rule is HCM murmur and mitral valve prolapse murmur, because of the decrease in venous return, the LV cavity size decreases, SAM occurs, and that is why intensity and duration of the HCM murmur increases. Click occurs earlier, and that is why the duration of the mitral valve prolapse murmur increases, but doesn't make much difference to the intensity. So this is the phase 2 of Valsalva. Phase 3 of Valsalva is the cessation of staining. Once the patient stops to stain, what happens is there is an increase in venous return. Now, because of the increase in venous return, ideally there should be an increase in arterial pressure. But here the arterial pressure doesn't increase. There is a transient decrease in arterial pressure because the intrathoracic pressure is decreased. Still, because the intrathoracic pressure is not rising, it is falling. That is why the blood pressure decreases, and that is why we get a reflex tachycardia. And finally, we should return. Phase 4 is the return of pre-Valsalva, where there is an overshoot of the systemic arterial pressure and there is a reflex bradycardia. So the phase 4 is the overshoot of the systemic arterial pressure, which has decreased in both the phase 2 and phase 3, but now it has overshoot. It didn't come back to normal. It has overshoot that phase, and that is why there is a reflex bradycardia. Now this is that image which shows you very clearly is phase 1, 2, 3 and 4. We know that phase 1 there is an increased cardiac output, so the BP which was 130 became 155. Now and there is a reflex bradycardia, heart rate is decreased. In phase 2, as I told you, there is a decreased venous return, so the cardiac output decreases, which causes a decreased systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, and mean arterial pressure, and that is why the BP fell down, and that is why there is a reflex tachycardia. In phase 3, what is happening is there is an increase in venous return, but there is no, it doesn't. The blood pressure it doesn't increase because the intrathoracic pressure is increased. So there is slow increase, but it doesn't come back to normal. However, in phase 4, there is overshoot of the systolic blood pressure to more than the normal, and that is why there is a reflex bradycardia. So these are the 4 phases of Valsalva. Now, this is a short summary of the 4th phase. Phase 1, there is a increase in venous return, so the BP increases, heart rate decreases. In phase 2, venous return decreases, so BP decreases, heart rate increases. In phase 3, the venous return is increasing, but the blood pressure is not increasing because of the increased intrathoracic pressure. So the BP is decreasing and heart rate is increasing. And finally, in phase 4, there is overshoot of the BP, and that is why there is a reflex bradycardia. Now, as I already told you, there is a because of the decreased venous return, all the murmurs of the right side, left side decreases, like AS, AR, MS, MR, TS, TR, PS, PR. Everything decreases except the 2 murmurs, which I have already told in detail. What happens is decreased LV cavity size causes an increased LVOTO, so the intensity and duration of HCM murmur increases. The click happens earlier, and so the duration of the MVP murmur increases. Now, there is one specific condition, like in patients with heart failure and LV dysfunction. We know that the phase 1 and 3 are normal, but in those patients, there is absence of decrease in arterial blood pressure. There is a decrease in arterial blood pressure during the phase 2, and even there is phase 4, overshoot of the blood pressure does not occur because the baroreceptors are not activated, and that is why you get something known as the square wave response. Not important to this topic, but you should just remember that in patients with heart failure, LV dysfunction, because the baroreceptors are not activated, you do not get a phase 2 decrease in arterial BP and a phase 4, that is overshoot of BP. So that is called a square wave response, which you get in heart failure. Now, I won't discuss this Muller's maneuver in detail, but it is the reverse of Valsalva maneuver. We do not commonly use it. So I won't go into detail about the Muller's maneuver. Now, next, coming to the isometric exercises. So what is the isometric exercise? The most common isometric exercise is hand grip. Now we know we have to do the hand grip. Ideally, we should take the ball which we use for patients with CKD with fistula, the tennis ball, and you have to, with both the hands, you have to use and do a hand grip, and you should not see the murmurs immediately, but you should take at least 20 to 30 seconds for it to act effectively. So after some 20 to 30 seconds, so what we have to do is we have to see the various murmur. Always remember, Valsalva maneuver during the hand grip should be avoided, and you should not use the isometric exercise in a patient with ventricular arrhythmias or myocardial ischemia. Now, it is again contraindicated in patients with recent MI, uncontrolled hypertension, cerebrovascular diseases, and aortic dissection, because your SVR increases a lot. Now, what happens during isometric exercises? There is a significant increase in systemic vascular resistance, which increases the arterial pressure, increases the heart rate, LV size and LV filling pressure, everything increases. So we know the most important thing is the AS murmur. Now, what happens in aortic stenosis is the LV pressure is very high. Suppose the LV pressure goes up to 200, and your aortic pressure in aortic stenosis is 100. So the normal gradient is 100. What happens with hand grip is your aortic pressure increases to 160 and 180, and so the gradient decreases, and that is why the aortic stenosis murmur decreases during the hand gripping. Now, in patients with AR, MR, what happens is because of the increased systemic vascular resistance, the runoff is increased, and in MR murmur, the LV to the blood from LA increases, and that is why AR murmur, MR murmur, and even VSD, it increases during the hand grip. We know that MDM murmur of MS is also increased because the cardiac output is anything that increases the cardiac output, increase the LA pressure, which causes an increased gradient from the LA to LV, and that is why the mid diastolic murmur of mitral stenosis is increased on hand grip. Again, on hand gripping, the SVR increases, the LV size increases, and so the intensity and duration of HCM decreases. Again, the MVP, the click occurs late, and so the duration of the murmur is decreased. I would like to emphasize again and again, anything which decreases the preload, it increases the murmur of HCM and increase the duration of the HCM. Anything which increases the LV size, it decreases the murmur of HCM and it decreases the duration of mitral valve prolapse murmur. Now, this is again one important thing, that is a cardiac cycle length and post PVC. So this is not something which you get every day during your examination, because it is very difficult to get a PVC during your cardiac examination. However, if you have a premature ventricular contraction, that is a missed beat, it makes too much changes to your examination finding. So one typical thing is this. Now, I don't know many of you have heard this or not. This thing is something known as a post PVC. You see the third beat in this image. Third beat in this image is a yeah. So this is a PVC, premature ventricular contraction. So what happens is, normally after a PVC, there is a compensatory pause. Now, what happens with that compensatory pause is the LV starts filling because the end diastolic volume increases. It initiates the Frank-Starling law. We know that in Frank-Starling law, the end diastolic volume is proportional to the contractility. So once there is a compensatory pause, the end diastolic volume increases, and so the cardiac contractility increases. So this is one important thing, because any PVC, post PVC, you get an increase in both in AS murmur and you get an increase in HCM murmur. Why? Because the LV contractility increases, it causes a dynamic LVOTO. Anything which increases the LV cavity causes a dynamic LVOTO, and that is why even the HCM murmur increases post PVC. But somebody may ask you, what happens on PVC to this? After a PVC, once the LV contractility increases, the LV systolic pressure increases. Can you see the yellow thing? So the yellow dot signifies the LV systolic pressure, which was normally around 100 to 120. It becomes around 170 to 180. However, post PVC, the aortic pressure usually decreases a little bit. Suppose it was 120, it becomes 100. It doesn't get much affected, but it decreases a little bit. Therefore, the gradient between the LV and the aorta increases. So after a PVC, the LV pressure increases, the aortic pressure decreases, the LV and this gradient increases. That is known as the Brokenberg-Braunwald-Morrow sign. So the Brokenberg sign is the increase in the LV systolic pressure, decrease aortic pressure, and increase gradient between the LV to aorta. However, the pulse pressure reduces. The pulse pressure reduces. So that is what is the Brokenberg-Braunwald-Morrow sign. So this is what something is important to remember, even if they don't ask in your exam. So after a PVC, we know that the AS murmur. So this is one of the important things to distinguish from AS from a MR. In most of the patients with sclerotic aortic valve, you get a murmur in the apex, which is known as the Gallaverdin phenomenon. Many a times, this Gallaverdin murmur will mimic a mitral regurgitation murmur. So suppose if the patient has AF or if the patient has a PVC, there is a beat-to-beat variation of this AS murmur, but not the MR murmur. Why? Because the AS has only one root, LV to aorta, whereas MR has two roots, LV to aorta and LV to LA. So that is why MR murmur, there is no beat to beat variation. Again, there is a pulmonary stenosis murmur will again increase after the PVC. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy murmur, as I already told you, because there is increased LV contractility, the systolic murmur increases, and it is known as the Brokenberg-Braunwald sign. Again, I told you post PVC, the mitral stenosis, after a PVC, because the LV cavity is increased in MVP, what makes the difference is not the LV contractility, but after that, the increased end diastolic volume, because the LV cavity size is increasing, there is a delayed click and decreased murmur. So this is the only maneuver, a post PVC, where the MVP murmur and HCM murmur does not go hand in hand. Till now, we have read all the manuals where both the MVP and HCM were going hand in hand. But here, after a post PVC, the next beat, the LV cavity size is increasing, and that is why the click is delayed, and so the murmur duration is less. We should always remember that post PVC, MR murmur, TR murmur, and VSD doesn't affect much. So these are the few things which we should always know. Now, next thing is something which we are not going to do. I think none of us are going to do in our practically is a amyl nitrate inhalation. So amyl nitrate is a pharmacological intervention which brings out or decreases many murmurs of cardiology. Now we should remember that how do you use is a crushed ampule in towel and take 3 to 4 deep breaths over 10 to 15 seconds. So over a crushed ampule in a towel, you should take 3 to 4 deep breaths over 10 to 15 seconds. Now there are various phases of amyl nitrate. In the first 30 seconds, there is systemic vasodilation, and so the SVR decreases. And that is why, if somebody asks you, how do you distinguish between an Austin Flint murmur and a mitral stenosis mid-diastolic murmur? There are various ways you will be knowing in your Viva. AR has all the classical sign of AR. MS has pulmonary artery hypertension, loud S1, atrial fibrillation, opening snap, pre-systolic accentuation. However, one of the important things which distinguishes the amyl nitrate is the amyl nitrate, because the amyl nitrate, because of decreased SVR, it decreases the Austin Flint murmur, whereas the amyl nitrate, it increases the heart rate, and that is why the LA pressure increases, the gradient increases, and so the mitral stenosis murmur increases. So that is one of the important difference between the MS murmur and the Austin Flint murmur. However, after the first 30 seconds, between 30 to 60 seconds, there is both increased heart rate and cardiac output, which causes the changes in MS murmur. However, you should always remember that majority of the auscultatory changes should be and are observed in the first 30 seconds of amyl nitrate. This is one important thing which we should know. And because of the increased cardiac output, the AS murmur, which we know because of amyl nitrate, there is decreased SVR. So the gradient between the LV and the aorta increases. Why? Because the aortic pressure decreases. And that is why the gradient increases. So both the AS and the PS murmur increases. The systolic murmur of tricuspid regurgitation increases. All the functional systolic murmur increases. The diastolic murmur of MS and TS increases. And the diastolic murmur of pulmonary regurgitation increases. The decreased murmurs are the with amyl nitrate. The MR murmur decreases and the Austin Flint murmur decreases. So the systolic murmur of MR is decreased. The diastolic murmur, Austin Flint murmur of AR is decreased. And we know because of decreased SVR, the LV pressure decreases, and so the TOF systolic murmur is decreased. Because the RV pressure is now all the blood goes from the RV to the LV. So right through left shunt is increased. In cases of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, the LV volume and size is decreased because of the decreased arterial, because of the amyl nitrate is LV size decreases, and so the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy murmur increases. And there is the early appearance of the MVP click, and so the long murmur is heard of MVP. Now, this is something which I don't want to discuss much, but it is a reverse of amyl nitrate. That is a methoxamine and phenylephrine. So we won't get into much detail because this is something which we are not going to use, methoxamine and phenylephrine. So this is what the moral of the story is. The differential diagnosis of murmur from dynamic auscultation. Many people will ask you, how do you differentiate HCM from AS? It is mainly based on your dynamic auscultation. On Valsalva, AS murmur decreases, the HCM murmur increases. On squatting, the HCM murmur decreases, whereas the AS murmur increases. How do you distinguish a galavadin from a MR? There is a beat-to-beat variation in AS, but not in mitral regurgitation murmur. MR decrease, amyl nitrate decreases the MR murmur, it increases the AS murmur because the gradient increases. Also the hand grip increases the MR, whereas the hand grip, because of the decreased gradient, it decreases the AS murmur. TR and MR, we know inspiration increases the TR, inspiration decreases the MR, but expiration doesn't have much value in a MR murmur. So there are various other differences. So So how valuable is the physical examination of cardiovascular system? There is a review. I think you should all go and read this. And all the murmurs needs to be evaluated, yes or no. I think all the diastolic murmur definitely needs evaluation. Continuous murmur, you should evaluate whether it's physiological or it's an organic cardiac murmur. Any systolic murmur which is grade 3 and above ideally should be evaluated, and ideally all murmurs should be evaluated, but all the murmur which is grade 3 and more, at least with the thrill, all the murmurs should be evaluated. So I would like to conclude here. Thank you.
Sir, one more time, can you explain hand
Your
grip
volume is very low. Your volume is.
yes. Uh, can you explain one more time effect of hand grip on MR and hypertrophic cardiomyopathy?
The MR
Hello?
hand grip.
Yeah.
When you do a hand grip with both the hands, you should do at least for 20 to 30 seconds with the both the hands. Always remember, you should ask the patient, ideally not to do with this, hold some object and then do a passive hand gripping for 20 to 30 seconds and then see the effect on murmurs. MR murmur, we know because of the increased systemic vascular resistance, the MR murmur increases. However, because of the increased SVR, the LV cavity size increases. Because anything which increases the LV cavity size, it decreases the dynamic LVOTO. So the LVOTO decreases, and so the duration and intensity of the HCM murmur decreases.